Hey Brian, here's your Sony A6500 menu settings for vlogging. One-handed operation, sensible use of auto modes, and saving on battery life where it makes sense. So let's go check it out. Now first things first, I'm shooting the camera in movie mode. I'm using a Sony multi-interface hot shoe compatible microphone, not one that connects via the 3.5mm input on the left side. I'm also using a native Sony lens. I'm not going to go into what to do when adapting third-party lenses via an adapter. First menu. Image size, aspect ratio, long exposure noise reduction. Stills related don't concern us right now. Neither does high ISO noise reduction. First setting we're going to change, color space. Going from sRGB to Adobe RGB, which is the larger color space. Because you can always go to a smaller colored space from a larger one, but not the other way around. Lens compensation, if you're using a native Sony lens, leave it on auto. This might come in handy if you're adapting a third-party lens. Bracket settings, none of our concern. Neither is memory for modes 1 and 2. Focus mode, of course, for vlogging, 99% of the time, you want continuous autofocus. As far as autofocus is concerned, of course we want continuous autofocus. The A6500 features one of the best autofocus systems ever built into a mirrorless body of that size. It's fast, accurate, reliable. Face tracking works pretty well, so overall it's just a very capable system for both good light and low light situations. There's other focus modes like manual focus and how to switch in between focus modes using one of the custom function buttons up here. I'm going to show you later. For vlogging, continuous autofocus is what you want. Priority sets, stills related, don't concern us. Focus area. My choice of focus area is wide. A wide focus area makes the most sense to me. If you're in frame, you're in focus. If you don't want to be in focus, don't be in frame. There's other choices. Center is this little area right in the middle. And it's just too small when you're in front of the camera because you might be left or right of it and therefore not in focus, although you want to be. It works if you're behind the camera and you can specifically point it at the subject you're interested in. Stills related, again stills related, none of our concern. Autofocus with shutter button, turn to on. This means that if you half press the shutter button, you can force the camera to focus, which in difficult lighting situations sometimes is of great help to you. Pre-autofocus, stills related, autofocus area auto clear, display continuous autofocus area, autofocus micro adjustments, again, something that might come into play when adapting a third-party lens. Exposure compensation and ISO, we're not going to do a menu dive for that. How to set it via the buttons and dials, I'm going to show you in a couple of moments. Metering mode, a chapter of its own. Under great lighting conditions, most metering modes will get you decent results. It is the difficult lighting situations where the camera starts to struggle and you might make a conscious decision for or against a metering mode. What you're looking at right now is multi-metering, and usually in combination with face tracking, it will get you decent results. As you can see, the camera tries to make the best of the situation, somewhat exposing my face so you can see it, but also preventing the skies from being blown out. Now, center weight metering, although being very helpful a lot of times, can also be a little tricky. Usually for it to take effect, yourself or your subject has to be pretty up close to the lens. And if you're vlogging with a super wide angle like I'm doing right now, this is much closer than selfie distance, so it can become pretty inconvenient. Now, spot metering will get you drastic shifts in exposure because it uses a tiny portion of the sensor right in the middle for metering. So for stationary shots like this, I can recommend this mode, but then again, you can't move around a lot because the area it uses for metering is like this big. So if you move your head, you will get dramatic shifts in exposure. So if it's a stationary shot, your subject doesn't move, all you care about is correct exposure of that subject. You don't care about if something blows out in the background, then I can recommend this metering mode. For vlogging in general, as a metering mode to be used most of the time, I can definitely not recommend it. Now to wrap this up, this is the highlight metering mode. What this mode does is, it makes sure there are no clipping highlights. It's good to know that it's there because if for some exceptional shot, you really care that there's no clipping highlights whatsoever. If you want a nice sky, for example, and that's all you care about, it's a very good mode to have, although you're not going to use it a lot. Just to show you, if I move over here, it will expose the one highlight correctly that's in the image. And as you can see, everything else is just super underexposed. Again, in my experience, multi-metering will get you the best results in most situations. Spot metering point in the center where it belongs. Exposure steps, either 0.3 or 0.5 exposure values. 0.3 gives you more options, so 0.3 it is. Auto exposure with shutter button. So this means that again, when you half press the shutter button, not only will you force the camera to focus, you also will force it to expose correctly what is in focus. Exposure standard adjustment, none of our concern. Flash, we're not using when vlogging, so we're gonna skip. White balance, again, a chapter of its own. Now, auto white balance usually does a good job, even if lighting sources are non-consistent. For example, in a daylight scenario, the difference between auto white balance and the daylight setting is minimal. The further you are to sunset though, the more off the daylight setting will be, because color temperature changes during the course of a day. So now, speaking both figuratively and literally, at the end of the day, you're better off with auto white balance, especially when vlogging and you're going in and out of buildings, for example. So long story short, just use auto white balance, because it's one less thing to worry about. Priority set, standard works fine for me. Dynamic range optimization, in my book, the more dynamic range from the get-go, the better. So we're not going to leave this at auto. We're going to click right on the click wheel 5 times, which gives us the 5th level of D-range optimization, which gives us the most dynamic range, which is good because we can always decrease it later on in post-production. Creative style? Now, if you don't want to do any kind of post-production color grading, the creative styles is what you want to use. Standard is fine for most situations. Vivid, if you want to have it really punchy. I like to use neutral. And as with all creative styles, if you click right on the click wheel, you can adjust contrast, saturation, and sharpness. In my case, since I do want to spend some time color grading, I will de-sharpen, desaturate, and de-contrast completely, which will give me the flattest possible image using a creative style. Now, picture effects are super dramatic. I never use them. If you do, just make sure that it's a conscious decision that you do use them, because you're not gonna post-produce or color grade your way back to a neutral start once one of these picture effects is applied. My recommendation actually would be to just turn them off. Now, if you really want to get into post-production color grading, you could also use a log profile, which is right here in picture profile under either picture profile 8, which is S-Log3, or picture profile 7, which will give you S-Log2. These profiles are super flat. Just know if you're using a picture profile, especially S-Log, you will have to do color grading. Then again, most of the time, I'm good with using my neutral, altered creative style. Soft skin effect, grayed out right here. Now, focus magnifier, useful tool because it allows you to check focus. How to use it with one of the custom function buttons, I'm going to show you later. Focus magnifier time, no limit. This means that once you're in focus magnifier mode, there's no time limit. You will have to decide for yourself when to zoom in and when to zoom out again, which is the most hassle-free variant in my opinion. Not interesting right now, not interesting. Peaking level, high, mid, or low, just determines how bright the peaking color shows up on screen. This is high, this is mid, and this is low. So in my book, high definitely makes the most sense. Peaking color, red by far my favorite pick. Sometimes at night, yellow also works well. Most of the time, even at night, red proved to be the best choice. Smile face detect, on, but not registered faces. Now, why do I choose regular face recognition over registered faces? Let's say you have somebody else use the camera, and this person is now closer to the camera and talking into it. Usually, you would want to have focus on her. But if your face is registered, like mine is right now, although you're in the background, focus will be on you, and that looks super weird if the person that's closest to the camera and talking into it is not the one in focus. And that's why I choose regular face recognition over registered faces, because this way, the person that's closest to the camera is also the one in focus. Movie, slow and quick motion. I like to choose program auto because the camera chooses shutter speed and f-stop for me, which is simply convenient. If you want to shoot with a fixed shutter speed and a fixed f-stop, you could also choose manual mode and have the camera expose via the ISO auto. Me personally, just because it's the most simple mode, program auto it is. Now, file format, I'm usually shooting XAVCS 4K and I'm shooting 25 frames 60 megabit because I don't have a very fast computer and 100 Mbit doesn't play back smoothly in my editing software. If you have a super fast computer, it's gonna get you the best possible quality. Since I really like to have a smooth editing process, I'm prepared to sacrifice some quality here using 60 Mbit. But if you can, use 100. As you might have noticed right now, using XAVCS 4K will turn down the screen brightness. So for the sake of this video, I'm gonna switch back to XAVCS HD to have a brighter screen. The only time I would actually switch to HD is if I was to shoot 100 frames per second and I again would use the 60 Mbit. But usually I would definitely shoot 4K. SNQ settings, don't concern us right now. Autofocus drive speed. Now for vlogging, I believe fast makes the most sense. It doesn't look as nice as maybe normal or slow, but sometimes things happen quickly and I just want the focus to be there. So I'm sacrificing some beauty to get some speed here. Totally up to you. That's just how I like to do it. Autofocus track sense, standard, always worked fine for me. Auto slow shutter, only important if you're shooting more than 25 frames per second. Let's say you're shooting 50. If you have this turned on in a low light situation, the camera will drop the shutter speed to 1/25th of a second, which will kill your fluid motion you try to achieve with your 50 frames per second. If that's something you want the camera to do, if you want the brighter image more than you want the fluid motion, turn this to on. If you would rather have a darker image but still get the fluid motion of 50 frames per second, turn this off, which is what I choose to do. Audio recording, of course, turned on. Audio rec level, I could choose if I was using a mic that connects via the 3.5mm input, but since I'm using the Sony multi-interface hot shoe compatible mic that connects via the hot shoe, I cannot manually level the microphone. Audio level display, of course, turned on for two simple reasons. Number one, you do see that audio is recorded, so you know that everything is plugged in correctly and the mic is turned on. And also, second reason, you know that it levels correctly. Always good to know. Right here, also grayed out, wind noise reduction, which is digital internal camera wind noise reduction. I wouldn't use it even if I could, because I would much rather rely on a foam wind muff dead cat combination for wind protection. Marker display, turned off. The front curtain shutter, not interesting right now. Release without lens, enabled. It's a good setting if you're adapting a third-party lens and you have a completely manual adapter and the camera doesn't recognize there's an adapter on it and a lens. This will allow you to still shoot stills and video. You can leave this enabled, although you're using a native lens. Release without card, disabled. Would only make sense to enable it if you wanted to record to an external recorder directly, not even using an SD card. But since when you're vlogging, 99% of the time you are going to record to an SD card, I want the camera to realize that there's none in there and tell me, so I can make sure there's an SD card in there that's working, so I can record stills and video to it. Steady shot, of course, turned on. It's optical stabilization. There's just benefits, no downsides. Steady shot settings, only useful if you're using prime lenses. You could set the millimeters. Doesn't really make sense for zoom lenses. Zoom settings, optical zoom only, of course. Display button, monitor, lets you choose which screen modes to toggle by hitting the display button, which is clicking up on the click wheel right here. Now display all info makes sense. Displaying no info also makes sense if all you want to do is frame a shot. Level sometimes comes in handy, so that's how I set this up. You can do the same thing for the finder, but since I never use the finder, I'm not going to do it. Finder monitor, monitor only, because this is all I want to use for vlogging. Also, if you're going to auto, this little sensor up here will realize if there's something in front of it. Usually it would be your face, but when you're vlogging, this can really be a pain in the ass. So that's why I choose monitor only. This way, this doesn't do anything. Finder frame rate, not interesting. Zebra at 100%. This basically shows you clipping highlights like this. I set it at 100, so only if highlights truly clip and there's no detail left, I want to be notified. Grid line. The rule of thirds grid makes the most sense to me. It's the best compromise, in my opinion, between a grid that actually helps you in composing shots but doesn't overcrowd the screen, which the squares grid and squares grid plus diagonal really do, in my opinion. So for me, rule of thirds, it is. This doesn't concern us. Auto review, stills related setting, turned off. Custom key, shooting. Now custom button 1, the C1 button right up here, is assigned the movie function. So this way, pressing C1, I can start and stop the recording, which is more convenient than using the standard record button that is located out here on the side of the camera. Custom function button number 2, C2 button, right next to the C1 button, choose focus modes. This way, if I'm pushing C2, I can choose between autofocus continuous and manual focus. Custom button number 3, C3 down here, the trash can button, focus magnifier. This way, let's say I'm choosing manual focus, then going into focus magnifier mode, coming over here, clicking in the middle of the click wheel to check focus. And now, using the manual zoom ring, I can fine tune my focus. Center button, the one right in the middle of the click wheel, lets me choose the metering mode. Left button on the click wheel, drive mode, is fine. Right button, the ISO, again fine, just the way it's labeled. Down button, exposure compensation. We're going to set this function to a dial later. Now these two options refer to this little lever button combination up here. For auto exposure level button, I have chosen auto exposure level toggle, and for autofocus manual focus button, I have chosen autofocus manual focus control toggle. This is what it does. If you've set it to toggle and you've set this little lever to auto exposure level, by pressing this little button, you can lock the exposure, indicated by this little star in the lower right corner. Similar, if you set this to autofocus manual focus, by pressing this button, you can lock focus, which essentially will put you into manual focus mode. This way you can lock focus and or exposure, and of course unlock them as well. And because it's set to toggle, you can lock focus and or exposure from behind the camera, then step in front of it and do whatever it is you want to do. Focus hold button is only interesting if you have a lens that has a focus hold button. But we're looking at Sony G Master lenses that are super expensive. Kit lens and lower grade lenses usually don't have the focus hold button. Custom key keys for playback, not really interesting to me. This is how I set them up. If you want to do something different, feel free to do so. Function menu set. Now the function menu is a little quick menu, so to speak, if you're coming from the Canon side of things, that you can access via pushing the FN button right here. There's 12 fields that you can assign individual functions to. Now basically all the things I cannot set up using either a dial or a button, I have put into the function menu. Upper 1 allows me to switch between shooting modes, for example, switching from program auto, where the camera pretty much does everything, to, say, manual mode, where I have to do everything. Upper 2 lets me switch my creative style. Upper 3, if I do choose to shoot log, this is where I can set that picture profile. Steady shot, should I not need it for some special occasion, this is where I can turn it off. White balance, if for some reason you need to switch, it also makes sense to put it in here. As does dynamic range optimization for upper 6. Lower 1, should you want to use a different grid line. Audio rack level, if you need to re-level the microphone, this is a quick way to do it. Then we got Zebra and Gamma Display Assist. Now if you're shooting S-Log, it's a super flat profile, and that's the way it shows up on the screen. If you turn Gamma Display Assist on, you will see a graded image. Let me show you what I mean. Functions menu, picture profile. I want to shoot S-Log 3 now. Super flat profile, but I want to know what it can look like graded. So again, going into the functions menu, going to Gamma Display Assist, and choosing S-Log 3. This way I'm getting a graded image to show up on my live view or an external monitor, but I will still record super flat S-Log profile video. Dial wheel setup, click wheel for shutter speed, dial up here for the f-stop. Works fine for me. Dial or wheel, exposure value compensation, set to the dial up here. So this way, although I'm in program auto and the camera takes care of shutter speed and the f-stop, I can compensate the exposure if I feel the need to up here. As you can see, Zebra comes and goes. Also, and I almost forgot this, although I'm in program auto and the camera pretty much takes care of everything, shutter speed, f-stop and the ISO, I will change something with the ISO. Click right on the click wheel, which will get you right into the ISO settings menu. Leave this at auto, but click right once again. And here you can set the ISO minimum in auto mode, and 100 makes the most sense, because the less ISO, the less digital noise, and the cleaner the image. Overall, the better it'll look. Now ISO maximum, I think 6400, if you're shooting 4K, is the absolute maximum. At least for me, it's the maximum amount of noise I can take. I'd much rather set it to 3200. I would rather go with a cleaner image that's not as bright than with a brighter image that has more digital noise. So 100 for the minimum and 3200 for the maximum. For me, it is. Movie button, always, which simply means that no matter what mode you're in up here, pressing the movie button will always start video recording. Dial wheel lock, unlocked, audio signals, off. Wireless options, none of our concern right now. Neither is dealing with the applications right now, nor dealing with playback functions and options. Now monitor brightness. If you're shooting HD, although it drains the battery faster, because the screen is not really good when used in bright sunlight, you want to have this set to 2. If you're shooting 4K, it's going to be dimmed down either way. Viewfinder brightness, none of my concern, because I have this turned off anyway. That's why the color temperature of the viewfinder doesn't interest me as well. Gamma Display Assist, already located in the functions menu, currently turned off because I'm using a creative style, not an S-Log picture profile. Volume settings, actually, this I set to the max.
Now why use the maximum volume? Well, if you want to play back a clip in camera, and you want to get at least what I would call a semi-good idea of the audio, you really want to have this set at 15, because the internal microphones of the camera are pretty weak.
Tile menu, turn to on. This is the tile menu. I like it because it gets me where I want to go quicker. If you don't know your way around the Sony menu system, you might benefit from turning this off and going to this screen right away. Not interesting. Delete confirmation. Cancel first. Makes sense. Before you can delete something, the camera asks you, do you really want to delete it? Display quality drains more battery in high. Details will look better if you set this to high, but honestly, to judge what you're shooting, you don't need to set this to high. So I keep it at standard and save some battery life. Now power save start time is currently grayed out because currently I'm running off of a power bank. As soon as I unplug, I can set this, and I would set this to 1 minute. So if you don't do anything for a minute, the camera will go into power save mode. Going back to Anchor power bank battery power, auto power off temperature high. This will enable you to record longer without voiding your warranty. The temperature of the device may rise to prioritize recording time. Would you like to change this setting? Oh yes. NTSC PAL selector, North America, you're shooting NTSC, 30 frames, 60 frames per second respectively. If you're from Europe like myself, PAL it is, 25, 50 frames per second. Cleaning mode, every once in a while you can perform sensor cleaning. Once you're done, you have to turn the camera off. then you can turn it back on again. Touch operation, touch panel plus pad, touchpad vertical, on, touchpad area set, whole screen. None of these settings concern us right now. USB power supply. If you want to run this camera off a power bank like I'm doing right now, of course, this has to be turned on. None of the other settings concern us right now. Here you could format the SD card, file number, series. This way the camera will just count up by 1 each time you hit the record button. And this is basically how I set up my Sony A6500 for vlogging. Custom function button number 1 allows me to start and stop the recording. Custom function button number 2 lets me switch between focus modes. Custom function button number 3 down here gives me focus magnifier, so I can really fine-tune my focus if I need to. If I want to lock or unlock autofocus and exposure, I can do it up here. If I want to compensate the exposure in any way, I'm using the dial up here. As you can see, zebras come in, currently set at 100%, so only if highlights really clip, zebras show up. Here I can toggle my display modes, digital level, all info, only basic info. I'm using the rule of thirds grid to help me compose my shots. If I want to change anything else, I'm going into my functions menu. Here I can change the shooting mode from program auto to manual exposure, for example. I can select my creative styles and alter them if I feel the need to. I can use a picture profile if I choose so. I can turn on and off steady shot, choose my white balance mode, my dynamic range optimization mode, my grid line. I can re-level my audio, currently grayed out because again, I'm using a hot shoe microphone, not the one that works via the 3.5mm input. Can select zebras and gamma display assist. And if you can think of other functions that would make sense to put here, let me know. And if you set the camera up this way, working with it will be a lot quicker, a lot more intuitive, and overall a much nicer experience. So Brian, and everybody else of course, if you liked the video, if you found it helpful, please make sure to leave a thumbs up. It's greatly appreciated. Any kind of comment or feedback is welcome, and I'll try to answer as quickly as possible. Also, should you feel like supporting the channel, definitely check out the video description. There might be some product links that are interesting for you. In any case, as always, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for watching, and hopefully see you again soon.